Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andile Khumalo, and you are welcome to the online, or shall we say, the digital launch of my good friend Bruce Whitfield's book, The Upside of Down. That's the big heading, and he and I are talking about what does it mean in this book and what is in the book, what is there for you to enjoy. The Easter weekend, of course, is on its way. I hope you're all doing well on day 13 of 21. Well done for staying indoors and doing your very best to do so. Whether we get an extension or not, I think South Africans, to a large extent, have done relatively well. But you might be looking at the weekend ahead. I can tell you also your kids are, because they know you shouldn't be working at home. And you might be looking for something to do, something to read, something to get you going. So my good folks at Pan Macmillan and also Exclusive Books, with, of course, the author himself, Bruce Whitfield, and Ins Connect, we decided that we should do this digital launch here today. So let's welcome in Bruce Whitfield. Hello, sir.
Andile, how's it? Welcome. Nice to see you. And to everybody who's taking time out of their day to watch, thank you very much for joining us from all over the world. I've had friends from around the globe contacting me on this. I mean, the world of social media and interconnectivity is nothing short of astounding. It's just brilliant. And so, yes, this is the book. I know you don't have a physical copy. You had a digital copy. Thank you for downloading that, by the way.
You're welcome.
This is what the book looks like. It's called The Upside of Down: How Chaos and Uncertainty Breed Opportunity in South Africa.
Right. First of all, how's lockdown for you?
Lockdown is the best thing ever. My children, for the first time, are learning responsibility. My children are learning how to live a regimented life. My children are doing chores for the very first time in their lives. And frankly, it's nice not having to go out and do stuff. It's like proper lockdown, but I've become a member of the 5 a.m. club, and I'm waking up really early in the morning to get lots of work done before they emerge, because then all hell breaks loose. Right now, they're at the opposite side of the house doing holiday projects for school, and I think we've locked them in, and I've got the keys in my pocket, so I think we'll be fine for the next hour.
That's good. That's good. We're not going to have another CNN moment of the young people walking in on you. All right. For those who do not know who Bruce Whitfield is, where have you been? He's obviously an award-winning financial journalist. Many of you listening to him on the radio, watching him on ENCA, and also reading the many articles that he's written, either on print or for digital. He's a man who's won many an award. And I'm actually surprised, Bruce, this is only the first time you've written this book, or a book for that matter. Why so long?
Because it's blimmin' hard work. People have been talking to me about writing books, and I've been very lucky that I've been approached by publishers over the years. And it was a discussion with Pavlo Phitidis, who had just written his book, Sweat, Scale, Sell. And I was laughing at the pain he was going through, and he was trying to identify a title for his book. And he went, "Damn you, I'm going to make you feel what this feels like." So he got me in a room with Terry Morris at Pan Macmillan. And 20 minutes into our lunch, we had a spidergram of what the book needed to be about. It had a completely different title. It had a very rude word in the title. And thank goodness for the people at Pan Macmillan, because they very kindly directed me properly. And I couldn't think of a better title for South Africa right now, frankly, than The Upside of Down, because geez, we're down.
Indeed we are. Indeed we are. Let's get straight into it. So, ladies and gentlemen, how we're going to run this is that Bruce and I will have a brief chat about the book and some of the ideas that is put forward in the book. And then you have a link for you to share your thoughts and share your questions. Please click on that and submit your questions. I've got the link in front of me, and I'll be able to get through all of your questions by name, surname, the company you come from, and of course the question. And I will send that over to Bruce when we get to the Q&A session. Bruce, let's start up right in the beginning. You know, earlier in your book, you introduce us to your children's music room at school, and you reference us to a note that's just below the light switch there, which means, you know, most people are going to read it, which I thought was pretty clever. But let me read it for everybody else at home. It reads, "Dear optimist, pessimist, and realist, while you were arguing about the level of the water in the glass, I drank it. Kind regards, the opportunist." What is the relevance of this note, and perhaps the reason for the book?
It's absolutely so seminal. That little note just tickled my fancy, and I borrowed it from school, because we all know these people. You know, these people who go, you know, I'm really an optimist, but, or they go, you know, I'm not really a pessimist, but, or they go, I'm not really an optimist or a pessimist. I'm more of a realist. And those are people, and I'm sorry if you're one of them, that I just want to punch in the face, because it is our big problem as a society. We get dragged into the mire of negativity so easily. And I'm going to be critical of my own industry here, and that is the media industry. We struggle to get a whole picture, to get a holistic picture. We have so many problems in society, and we as journalists, and I put myself in that camp as well, I'm guilty of the same sort of behavior, is we are so busy focusing on the bad guys, so busy focusing on the negative, so busy concentrating on the news, the hardcore news of the day, that we fail to provide a broad mirror on society. And one of the oldest titles in the United Kingdom, for example, is The Mirror. It's a tabloid newspaper. It's a crock of rubbish nowadays. But if you think of a newspaper or any media channel as being a mirror, when you look at a mirror, you must see what is there. And I don't think that we in media hold up a real mirror of society. So we hold up particular lenses and we give particular perspectives, and we think it's our job to be exposing the bad guys. And it is absolutely vital. It's a critical job. And it's one of the reasons why South Africa is still going, because media has done its job. But we have failed in providing a holistic view. South Africa is not all bad. The world is not all bad. If you look at the work of somebody like Hans Rosling, for example, who wrote a book called Factfulness, Hans Rosling challenges our biases. He challenges our perceptions. And most of these perceptions are media-fueled perceptions, and increasingly and dangerously, these are perceptions that are fueled through social media. And social media has become this great big echo chamber of bias, and has become the place where we follow people who agree with us, we follow people we like, we follow people who tell us what we want to hear, and we get into this echo chamber and we start believing it. And so I sat and I just looked at the sign one morning after dropping my kids off at the music class. I went to the dear optimists, pessimists, and realists, and we know those people. While you were arguing about the level of the glass, half full, half empty, it doesn't really matter, I drank it. Regards the opportunist. And it got me thinking about the magnificent businesses that South Africa has seen emerge over the last 50 years. And a whole bunch of South African businesses actually have just recently, in the last year or two, been celebrating 50-year anniversaries, whether it be Ital Tile, for example, or Spur, or Pick n Pay, or a host of other businesses too, have had their 50-year anniversaries. And more recently, the sorts of companies that were started up in South Africa in times of absolute crisis, whether it be Bidvest, which was founded in 87, as P.W. Botha was on his knees and taking South Africa into deeper and darker economic times than now.
Disastrous, wasn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely. 1990 to 1994, a bright young guy called Adrian Gore leaves a full-time job to go to a startup with him and him alone. And he goes to Laurie Dippenaar at RMB at the time, and he says, I've got an idea. And Laurie says, what's the idea? He says, oh, I like your idea. Revolutionizing medical aid, which at that point was not sustainable. And he and Adrian Gore understood that. And he said, okay, well, bring your team. I said, I am the team. Well, bring your product. I said, I don't have a product yet. Well, have a desk. And these guys who, as opportunists, saw opportunity at a time of crisis when immigration rates were spiking up, when people were leaving the country. And I just started thinking about these people, and I went and I spent some serious face time, and they were very kind to give me that access. And they told me incredible war stories, which I incorporated into a series of talks. The first, which was called The Upside of Down, and then another one called How to Thrive at the Edge of Chaos, and a more recent one called Rebels, Renegades, and Problem Solvers. And it tries to give a very real view of South Africa and our dire economic situation, but also tells the stories, gives the balance of telling the stories, that people who in chaos see opportunity and capitalize on the opportunity that other people choose to ignore.
In that chaos, or in finding those opportunities in that chaos, as the opportunist says, he's drinking the water, very often there's a few, shall we say, elements of society that have to work together. And we in South Africa have had our fair share of distrust between government and business. And I want to draw your attention to one of the quotes that you got in the book. You say something, you say, just as business requires political stability and policy certainty to thrive, Governments need profitable businesses to keep creating jobs that provide the growth and that pays the taxes that can service the needs of the voters. Now, academically, this relationship seems quite symbiotic. And all logic says these people should work together. So I'm interested in your own observation in the many years you've been covering financial journalism and I guess the political economy. Why is it that government and business in South Africa have just not found each other?
It takes me back to a cup of coffee I had with a civil servant at the Vida Cafe across the road from 702 in Gwen Lane in Johannesburg 15 years ago. And no names, no pactoral on this one, but this guy was saying his boss wanted an introduction to business leaders. His boss wanted to start talking to business. And his boss is still very much involved in politics and is still very much a key role player. And I looked at this guy and I said, but nobody in business trusts you. And he said, well, we don't trust anybody in business. That was 15 years ago. But so I made some connections and stuff and they went absolutely nowhere. And then suddenly on the 9th of December, 9/12/2015, all hell broke loose. And all of us will remember that fateful night. 4 minutes past 8 in the evening, a statement arrives after days of rumors that Nhlanhla Nene is about to be fired. And the statement comes out from the presidency that Nhlanhla Nene has been relieved of his duties. And what we subsequently found out, of course, was this is what the day after Nene refused in a cabinet meeting to give Jacob Zuma the green light on the R1 trillion nuclear deal that he'd done on a visit to Moscow with Vladimir Putin. And it absolutely infuriated Jacob Zuma. He then appointed Des van Rooyen. Oh my goodness gracious me.
Weekend special.
The weekend special. 92 hours. I mean, we went as a country from being a country with the longest serving finance minister in history. Trevor Manuel was in the Treasury for like 13 and a half years and did a great job, to having the world's shortest serving finance minister of 92 hours. And that was Des van Rooyen. I mean, what a complete utter dog show that was. But for the first time, that exposed the state capture story. That was the first time that we actually came to terms with the fact that all of these moves that we'd seen, and there'd been bits and pieces, and no director general was holding on to their job for more than a year, and people were being shifted and moved, and suddenly it all became abundantly clear in that moment that there was something deeply dark and horrible going on. We knew about the Guptas, we knew about the relationships, but we had no idea just how insidious it was and how absolutely connected it all was. That Nene moment was absolutely pivotal. That gap on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday into the weekend was when anybody with any political connection in business was on the phone to their political connection and explaining in very clear detail what the problems were. People like Patrice Motsepe were in the room, and I did ask Patrice about this the one day, and I said to him, so in that room, is it true that you swore at the president? And he went, I did much more than that. But he wouldn't tell me what exactly he had done. But people with huge influence used that influence and power to convince Jacob Zuma to back off and to reappoint Pravin Gordhan, who he had previously moved out of Treasury and into local government, to put him back in the Treasury. And that was a crucial move. And it was in Davos in that January of 2016, which was the gloomiest gatherings I have ever been to. I don't know if you've been to Davos, but the Kirchner Museum, where South Africa used to have its base in Davos, slap bang in the middle of town. You can't miss it. If you walk anywhere in Davos, it's there. Nelson Mandela's face was on one side. The flag was on one side. It was a really hotbed of activity in previous years. January 2016, it was like a cowboy movie with tumbleweed going through the middle of town. Nobody came. The only person who enjoyed that gathering, there was no business leader who enjoyed it. There were no politicians who enjoyed it. The one night, Rob Davies and Ibrahim Patel and Jeff Radebe were standing in the world's loneliest semicircle with half-drunk drinks, just so gloomy and depressed, but unable to express it. But Pravin Gordhan was in the opposite end of the room, really revving up business leaders who were there. And he got them to agree at that point to come back to South Africa and to collaborate and to work with government. And they came back. Of course, there were meetings in that February. The president got on board, at least in name. And for the first time, we had government and business working together. And there was a huge amount of hope. But then it dragged on and nothing really happened. And finally, Jacob Zuma got fired. And then we went to Ramaphoria. It was all great. And then we didn't have to try anymore because it was all going to sort itself out. And so we got a bit we got a bit slack and complacent. And so we stopped trying. And suddenly Ramaphoria went from Ramaphoria to Rama reality and then to Rama what the... and we got into this phase of deep despair once again. And ironically, COVID-19 is doing something that no other crisis in South Africa has managed to do, and that is, again, force everybody into the room. CEOs I've spoken to have been in these rooms tell me off the record and confidentially, and I won't break any of those confidences, but tell me of the extraordinary collaboration. I mean, amazing collaboration behind the scenes in terms
Do we
of help,
need
in
a whole
terms of the
crisis
economy, in terms of advice. This is South Africa. Of course we need a crisis. We can't do it ourselves. We're like kids, I'm afraid, who need a big stick to be waved at us. We've been offered carrots. We've been offered opportunity. We know what we need to do because of a very complicated and divided and divisive history and divisive politics and poisonous politics and vested interests and the real risk of the bad guys looming large again. That trust issue has been absolutely huge. So this COVID crisis provides us yet another opportunity of a burning platform to collaborate and work together for a new way of thinking about this country's future.
You cover a couple of topics in the book, and please, guys, do go and get it as well. Later on, I'll show you how you can go and get it at Exclusive Books. They've got a 10% discount for you, but of course, there's some digital channels as well. Bruce, you touch on a few themes, and let's start with inequality, which you go into at quite length in the book. In fact, let's get our terminology right, because in the book, you argue that in the South African context, it's not inequality. We should not call the South African economy unequal. We should call it unfair. Why do you say so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, goodness me, where do we start? Can we go back to 1652? We have to go back to 1652 because that's where the story really begins, with Van Riebeeck coming and planting a Dutch flag on South African soil in Cape Town, on what is now the foreshore of Cape Town, roughly where the Naspers building is, would have been the old sort of beachfront that he would have come ashore on. And we then had 370 odd years of subjugation of indigenous peoples. And so Europeans arrived in South Africa, made it home, made it comfortable, built the cities, built the infrastructure, and took over, and then exploited the huge mining opportunities that existed. And gradually the colonization of South Africa happened, from Dutch hands to British hands to Dutch hands, to war and strife and difficulty and groot treks and all sorts of other things. And gradually over that period of time, South Africa's indigenous people were designated into becoming third-class citizens, and in the time of Verwoerd and P.W. Botha and others, not even citizens at all, but then put on 13% of the land in homelands and effectively became gastarbeiters in their own country as they came to serve white South Africa. So we get to a situation where we have vast inequality, and 25 years into our democracy, that inequality is by and large, still race-based. If you are born white and privileged in South Africa today, you have a far higher chance of getting access to great services, education, healthcare, all sorts of things than you do if you're born poor and black. I defy anybody to argue against that point. And that's why I argue in the book that I think inequality is an excuse. It allows us a get-out-of-jail-free card. We can't do anything about it. It's inequality. Everywhere in the world is inequality. I mean, look at Brazil. There are favelas everywhere. You've got the rich people, mostly descended, incidentally, from Spanish and Portuguese settlers 300-400 years ago. I argue that South Africa's structure is fundamentally unfair. Now, I don't proffer any sort of insights as to how we fix it, other than some kind of mechanism to generate growth. And for years, government has been beating about the bush and talking about inclusive growth. And there's been no time more prescient than now to look at this with a very, very fresh lens and to say it is absolutely critical, as we understand just how wrong our society is, Now, there's lots of fear, of course, in society when it comes to the land question. And Andile Khumalo has written a fabulous book on land and the many proposals that are on the table for land. The plea for land, for example, isn't a plea for land. Not everybody wants to become a farmer. It's a hard life. But it's a plea for access to the economy. It's a plea for help. And we failed. We have failed 2.5, 3 generations of young South Africans in our democracy. We failed them on the education front. Firstly, we keep talking about fixing education. We don't do it. We keep talking about fixing inequality, and we don't do it. We've really got to get started on these things because this crisis is laying it bare for all to see.
Let's go back to the education point you raised. And I'm sure I'm not the only South African that doesn't quite understand the fundamental problem. And hopefully you've done some work to try to understand this in your book, but we spend so much money on education. Every year you look at the budget, it's the biggest line item. We pour hundreds of millions every year. Yet all research says out of the other side of this factory pops out a young South African who's unemployable or who does not have the basic skills that education should give him or her. What's the problem? Like, why do we suck at this?
I think it's because we treat kids like idiots. We treat kids like they're stupid people. We treat kids, I mean, for example, and I quote the example of a fabulous startup. It's 6-7 years old now, Spark Schools. A young woman called Stacey Brewer came up to me. Sorry, Stacey, if you're watching. Stacey Brewer came up to me at Gibbs. It was an end-of-year party in about 2013, and she'd had a glass of wine. And she said, "You're going to interview me on the radio one day." And I went, "Yes, of course I will. Of course I will. What am I going to talk to you about?" She said, "We're going to change education." So I said to her, "Well, once you do that, why don't you give me a call?" And 18 months later, she gave me a call and she said, "Okay, I want you to come and see my first Spark School in Randburg." And I listened to her story and I went, hold on a second, this woman has got something going here. So far, 21 campuses, 15,000 kids in the Spark Schools program at a price which is equivalent, it's a private schooling system, a price equivalent to what government spends per child in government education. And they're delivering using technology, using something called blended learning. So using high tech in the classroom combined with real classroom teaching to stretch kids and to get kids to learn differently. And for example, and I say we treat kids like idiots, I mean, our grade ones, by the end of grade 1, are expected to count to 10. If you're a Spark Schools kid, the same kid in a different school, if you're not counting to 100 by the end of your first year at school, then there's a problem, and they will address that problem and make sure that you can. I think half the problem is we treat our kids like they're idiots, and the other problem is that we just don't have an effective mechanism for education, and I'm not sure the curriculum is that fabulous either. So we have got some deep structural problems. I mean, if you talk to anybody in education, they'll tell you that the unions are a problem. You talk to somebody like Jonathan Jansen, who, when he goes to public speaking tours, will show a video of a school in Limpopo. And he says, this is a government school, typical government school. It's one of those with a stoop and 3 rooms, too many children. Yet it's one of the schools, government schools in the country with the best performance. And he shows this video and he says, "What do you notice?" And you go, "Well, kids all look happy." I went, "Yeah, but what do you notice?" And they've interviewed teachers in this particular video. And suddenly it dawns on you that the school has got 4 teachers. 3 of them are Zimbabweans. 1 is an Indian national, a woman who is teaching in this particular school. And it's the mechanism they use. They've got exactly the same curriculum, but the teachers are fully engaged. The teachers are teaching properly. The teachers are spending full days at work. They're doing the marking. They're doing the extra lessons. They're doing the job of education, and they're doing it well. And this is Jonathan Jansen's concern, is that we're not seeing enough teachers doing the job of teaching, that it's more me than giving. And I don't think that our teachers, and this is a broad generalization, but in many schools, I don't think our teachers do justice to the kids that they're supposed to serve.
But that down, let's call it the state of our education, has been an upside for some private sector players. Spark Schools being one of them. That's a bit of a new business and a startup, I guess. But bigger companies have come as well. Curo, Advitech, even Stadio on the university front. Don't you think sometimes that might be the cause of the distrust, in that, you know, it can't be a sustainable solution that everywhere government fails, the private sector comes and creates solutions that are just obvious and clearly work, because that shows off government in a way. But at the same time, we can't, the private sector alone can't do this. And that creates the friction between government and the private sector. And in a way, government doesn't really want the private sector involved because they're showing me off. And the private sector is saying, hey, we know how to do this stuff, let us in.
And it's that, it goes back to that trust thing, and it goes back to government not wanting to look stupid, and in not wanting to look stupid, failing dismally at one of its most basic tasks, and that is to try and ensure that we educate kids for the future. And by failing to do that, government is setting itself, not only the country up to fail, but ultimately will work itself out of a job as well, and will find itself replaced as generations of disgruntled young people become voters, and voters then decide that they want a better future for their kids. So it's a high time for a wake up. You talk to somebody like Chris van der Merwe, who's the founder of Curo. And the Curo story is absolutely lovely, and I'll keep it as brief as possible. But here's a guy, very Christian man, who doesn't like the way that public education is going. So he builds a school brick by brick with his bare hands, with some help, no doubt, but next to his church in Belleville or Parow or one of those places in the Western Cape. And it works. And so another church gets to hear about it, and they say, can you do the same for us? And so he does. And so they start teaching the government curriculum, and they start getting teachers who are fed up with the public system and coming in, and they start funding it through church funds. And suddenly this starts to become a bit of a business. And Chris van der Merwe takes this idea around to a couple of people, and somebody says to him, you know, you need to go and see Yanni Mouton. Yanni Mouton is an opportunist. He is in the mold of taking huge opportunity, and he may very well be the guy who can fund this particular business. And so off he went to a board meeting. He presented, and halfway through his presentation, Yanni Mouton pushed back his chair very dramatically from the table. And if you've ever met Yanni Mouton, you know he's quite a gruff guy. And he said, yeah, I've had enough. And pushed himself back. And Chris van der Merwe at that moment thought he'd lost Yanni. And he thought, well, if I lost Yanni, I've lost PSG. This is never going to fly. Yanni Mouton says, no, I've heard enough. I'm going to invest in this business in my own capacity. You guys, in other words, the people around the table, must decide how much PSG is going to invest. He made a commitment there and then, which he honored, to Chris van der Merwe. And the Curo story today is well known. So back to the point of government not wanting to look dumb. Chris van der Merwe did tell me at one point that they'd made proposals to government and said to government, look, it costs you, and I forget what the number was, call it 250 million rand to build a school for 1,000 kids. You give us the money, we will build it on spec, on budget, in time, and then you give us the 2,000 rand a month that it costs to educate a kid, and we will educate these kids. We will give the state curriculum in this state-funded school. We will do this. In the UK, I think they call them charter schools. We will do this. It's a model that's worked elsewhere, and we will still make a profit. And we will churn out better results than you are getting at other government schools. And government hasn't bitten. Because again, it's a case of, hold on a second, but we've got to be able to do this ourselves. This idea of the developmental state, that the center of everything is so much of what holds us back. If you've got a capable state, if you've got a state that functions and works well, and you've got civil servants who are professionals and spend all the time that they're given doing the job of running the country and helping the country improve, you've got a better chance of getting it right. But we don't have a capable state. Our state fails us. And therefore, without rubbing it in, collaboration, as we're seeing right now, a huge amount of collaboration for the greater good. We have to have more of that.
As we see right now, so let's talk about the now. You talked about being down, and since you've written the book, we are now down status officially. In fact, another rating agency has put us further into junk. We have got an economy that's clearly got a contract in the year. We've got population growth, obviously outstripping GDP growth. And we have got what I think is now a sure case of mass unemployment as a result of what's the impact of COVID-19. We are really down. How does one even start thinking about an upside in this environment, particularly for small businesses, which everyone agrees are important for an economy to create jobs and to create sustainability? But for some reason, nobody can articulate the upside opportunity here.
So, again, I shouldn't name names and I shouldn't be
Go for it, come on.
We're in it. we're in it. We're in it. I've only ever seen Ibrahim Patel smile once. And that was in Davos this year. He's a very honorable civil servant. Yeah, I think he's a very hardworking civil servant. I've seen him on airplanes from time to time. As soon as you're allowed, he's on his laptop and he's working, he's grafting, he's doing his stuff. But the penny dropped for me. We're in Davos this year, in the main sort of plenary sessions of Davos, and I'm trying to convince Patrice Motsepe just to give me a 2-minute interview just to talk about Davos and its significance and why it's important. And the last thing Patrice wants to do is give me anything. And 2 days later, he would then heap praise upon Donald Trump and make all kinds of trouble for himself. But he avoids media as much as I'm avoiding COVID-19 at the moment. I mean, it's the same sort of relation that he has. But he said, no, come with me. I'll take you somewhere far more interesting. And he took me up some backstairs and up into a meeting room where Tito Mboweni was sitting, Naledi Pandor was sitting, Ibrahim Patel was sitting, the bank CEOs were sitting, and there was a tiny group of investors. In the room was an old toppy who's been in mining in South Africa for many years. I missed his name. The chief financial officer of Heineken, and they've got their big brewery in Sedibeng, was there. The guys from PepsiCo, who were at that stage hadn't yet finalized the acquisition of Pioneer Foods, they were in the room and all expressing the same sorts of worries about South Africa. Electricity certainty. The financial director of Heineken saying, your power outages, your sudden stops really hurt us. It was really quite a personal, not we're really cross with you, but they really hurt us. And our ability to expand. And we want to expand. We want to grow. And so Tito Mboweni really very effective in, yep, we hear you, thank you very much. Naledi Pandor, very compassionate about the concerns and very understanding. Ibrahim Patel's turn came, but yeah, we're organized here because we've got a thing called bizportal.gov, and it's fantastic because it's the sort of place that everybody can understand the rules of investing in South Africa, and you get all of our regulation in one place. And at that moment, it came clear to me that that's our problem, and that we are an undergoverned and overregulated society.
Overregulated.
And regulation is, it's like standing on the oxygen pipe of somebody in intensive care. And unfortunately, government has been doing that for a very long time, making it blooming difficult and so many hoops to jump through. Adrian Saville, I quote him in the book, saying, you know what, we really do need to think about this differently. It shouldn't matter who owns companies. What should matter is that companies are allowed to thrive and grow, and they must create jobs. Our incentive structures are wrong, and we simply need to be encouraging capable people to create businesses and to grow those businesses, to become healthy tax-paying entities and to employ people who become taxpayers too. It is absolutely vital. It isn't even a point of contention. It shouldn't even be a point of discussion. We should massively deregulate and make, and we have businesses of, I don't know, turnovers of 10, 20 million rand. Give massive breaks to. And I know government is allergic to incentives because incentives are abused and abused significantly. We've got to find mechanisms to encourage people to take the risk, because capital on the table in any economy is tough. In South Africa, it just seems almost as if you're penalized for doing so.
Before I go to the questions, Bruce, last point I want to ask you about is, in the book you speak quite extensively about your conversations with companies and billionaires and people who founded really big conglomerates, have gone around the world to build those businesses. Some really succeeded, some really did not succeed. But in there were some stories and some highlights. I want to take you back. I want you to take us back to that Manchester pub. I really love that story. You grabbing a beer. I hope it was cold, by the way, because in England, you never quite know what beer you get. And you started thinking about SAB Miller, you started thinking about Bidvest, you started thinking about Nando's. What was going through your mind, and what was the upside you were seeing, or rather that they saw in what was relatively down environments?
I mean, so it was just after Nhlanhla got fired, and I was on a trip to Manchester, and I'd gone into this pub, and there were about 20 beers along the counter, and I chose a Boddington's because they call that the cream of Manchester. It's a bitter, and the best Boddington's is available in Manchester, the freshest Boddington's. If you go to Ireland, you have a Guinness. If you go to Manchester, you have a Boddington's. I had only one beer. I promise it's only one beer, because what you will hear now is a story you won't believe. And I stepped outside the pub about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's already getting dark, and this little white truck comes buzzing past me, and I see it's got a Bidvest Food Services logo on the side. Like, geez, that's incredible. Isn't that amazing? I mean, inside that pub with those 20 beer taps, there's Pilsner Urquell, there's Grolsch, there's Tyskie from Poland. There's a whole bunch of beers. I think 7 out of the 20 were beers brewed at that point by S.A.B. Miller. And I was feeling quite proud about that fact, that this little company from number 2 Jan Smuts Avenue in Johannesburg had globalized so successfully. And this little Bidvest Food Services truck comes trundling past, and I'm standing admiring this thing, looking down the road, and what's over there as this truck disappears down the road but a chicken that I recognize. And that chicken is the Nando's chicken. It's the logo of Nando's. And you just go, hold on a second, something magical has happened here. And that was the genesis then of the Thrive at the Edge of Chaos talk, which then forms part of the book and the stories that come from it. Because a large number of South African businesses that started up in really difficult times have globalized very successfully. Lots of others, and companies that have globalized for the wrong reasons have become horribly unstuck. Companies that have panicked into the globalization have failed dismally. Companies like Old Mutual spent hundreds of billions of policyholders' funds on demutualization and globalization, and were suckers for buying bad companies in bad environments. Even Discovery, with all of its intellectual property, went and spent R1 billion in the United States. Their good thing, though, was that they cut their losses. So many other companies have gone and really burnt their bridges. Most recently, we've had the announcement out of Famous Brands that the 2.3 billion rand that they spent buying something called Gourmet Burger Kitchen, which I had the misfortune to eat at in December this last year, that they're going to write off the full 2.3 billion. They've already written off half of it, and now it looks like they're going to do the same thing again. It's a business that they're throwing out, and their timing was shocking. Their motivation for doing so, diversification from high-risk South Africa, was so wrong. And I know that things have changed fundamentally on markets, and I don't think I put this in the book, although I might have. But let's ask you the question, Andile, and see if you get it right. Up until November last year, according to the Sunday Times Top 100 Awards, what were the 3 top performing shares on the JSE? I don't judge you if you don't get this wrong, because it's complete counterintuitive. But 3 companies, which were the top 3?
Last year.
Up for 5 years, up until November 2019, for the Sunday Times Top 100 Company Awards. They look at performance over 5-year periods. I'll put you out of your misery.
Okay, all right. I'll guess. Let me guess. Okay. I'll guess Capitec. I'll guess Naspers. And I'll guess maybe one of the
number
small...
5.
Yeah, that's it. I give up.
Okay, so Capitec is number 1, and it's been the top performing company over 5 years, 4 times in the past decade. Okay, that was up until November last year. All bets are off right now, of course. Number 2 was Clicks. You've heard of them, pharmacy group, a beauty retailer. Number 3 was Transaction Capital, debt collector, microlender, and funder of 15% of the taxis on South African roads. What is the one thing that those 3 companies have in common?
They are all based mainly in South Africa.
Completely in South Africa. So Capitec doesn't have a single business interest outside of South Africa. They've recently bought Mercantile Bank, and so they're now expanding from their comfort zone of retail banking into small business banking. There's Clicks, which ironically was managed by a foreign CEO and is the only retailer that hasn't dabbled outside of South Africa. David Neal came from Boots in the UK, ran it for more than a decade, and focused entirely on the opportunity that was present here. And focused entirely on that. And then the third one, Transaction Capital, again, 100% on the opportunity in South Africa. Mass market businesses, serving local companies as local citizens, serving local businesses, doing its core business in South Africa. No fancy footwork, no tricks, no globalization, no going and buying overpriced assets elsewhere. Now, I'm not saying that that is the secret, but a considerably worth thinking about.
Absolutely.
When you consider the sorts of executive behaviors we've seen and board behaviors and the sort of pressure that shareholders, ordinary South Africans, have put on those boards and shareholders to make dumb decisions in so many cases.
And if we had more time, the one conversation I would love to have picked up with you is how I think certainly the listed environment is too forgiving to CEOs and boards that make bad decisions. I mean, we almost just like read the SENS announcement. Oh no, Woolworths has written down its investment in Australia, a couple of billion, oh, tough luck. Oh, Tiger Brands has done this, oh, a couple of billion, tough luck. Famous Brands has done this, oh, a couple of billion, tough luck. New Look, I can go on and on. It's like, if that was my business and I invested in a company where a guy called Bruce Whitfield just wrote off $8 billion, I don't know if I'd be so forgiving. These guys, they keep their jobs. And, maybe years later, things like maybe Cecil, where the two CEOs were forced to resign. But even that felt a little late, didn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, we've had 50 CEOs of listed companies go in the last 14 months. I mean, it happens one at a time, so you're not always aware of it. And again, some of these guys didn't make the problems. They inherited the problems, but they didn't fix them, and so they needed to go as well. And it's not always the CEO. In many cases, the strategy is led by the CEO, but the CEO is under pressure from a board. The board is under pressure at the AGM from shareholders who are saying, so how are you diversifying? What are you going to do? How are you going to change? The political system in South Africa is so corrupt and so bad. We've got to de-risk. We've got to de-risk. I think we're all equally, frankly, culpable. I don't want to sound like an ANC minister who says this is collective responsibility. But geez, like as shareholders, as South African citizens, maybe the problem is more with us and the way we think about where we are, our own biases about the country in which we live, the fact that we don't have faith. I mean, one quick story and then we'll get on to the questions. My eldest son was doing a school project the other day, and the school's been very good about sending sort of bits of homework through and getting the kids to think about things. And the question was, what item did you stockpile most in your house? And this was ahead of COVID-19. And he looked at me with this most beautiful expression of pure innocence and said, Dad, what's stockpiling? And I just felt so proud in that particular moment that we hadn't fallen for that particular trap, because I simply refuse to fall for that trap. And we didn't stockpile, and we didn't fall for the trap. We didn't go and stand in germ-generating queues that were going around the block as people went to go and buy broccoli and Brussels sprouts and things that they would ordinarily never eat in a million years, but something you've got to have it all just in case, so nobody else can have it and you can have it. We as a society, I think we're quite damaged sometimes. And sometimes
let's get to the questions, Bruce. You and I could go on all day. Val Cousin from Zero Plus Trading wants to ask, surely the government must take this opportunity to implement structural reform introduced by Tito Mboweni. By opportunity, I imagine, the pandemic we're currently going through. What's your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. I mean, Tito Mboweni becomes the finance minister, and thank goodness Cyril Ramaphosa had the good sense to appoint him. Remember, I mean, I hope I get the sequence right. We go from Trevor Manuel to Nhlanhla Nene, Trevor Manuel to Pravin Gordhan, to Nhlanhla Nene, to Des van Rooyen, to Pravin Gordhan, and then to Snappy Dresser, what's his name? Public Enterprises.
Malusi Gigaba.
Malusi Gigaba. He's like Roman Polanski. He makes intimate movies. And
don't even go.
And then back to Nhlanhla Nene for a bit, and then Nhlanhla Nene had fibbed about going to visit the Guptas, and Cyril Ramaphosa must have looked around his cabinet table and have gone, okay, is there anybody here who I can be absolutely certain didn't go and visit the Guptas? Well, I can't be, so therefore I need to go outside. And good on Tito Mboweni for stepping up to the plate. What he did, which was a stroke of genius, middle of last year, was he published his economic plan, not via cabinet or via structures or anything else. He put it into the public domain. Everybody got to see it at exactly the same time.
His own plan, Bruce.
Pardon?
He leaked his own plan. That was a stroke of brilliance.
It was, because for once we didn't get a watered down plan. We didn't get a sanitized version. We got a very clear picture, and it was the picture that really should have saved us from the downgrade. But we then got into our typical navel-gazing, vested interest South African debates, and it went absolutely nowhere. We then get the budget, which is presented in February this year, and the finance minister delivers a phenomenal budget under the circumstances, but it requires our civil service to not take a pay cut, not to not get an increase, just to mitigate an increase. And immediately the vested interests go, oh, no, you can't do that. We have a deal. We also have a deal that you've got to do public service and delivery, which doesn't always get fulfilled either, civil servant. So there's a problem on that particular front. So again, very, very powerful unions in South Africa, powerful vested interests. And now what we're getting from Tito Mboweni is he's got the green light from Cyril Ramaphosa to implement structural reforms. And frankly, there is no time like the present, because if we fail to do it now, we're never going to do it. And already you've got the ANC and COSATU and the Communist Party who've written to Cyril Ramaphosa saying, don't let Tito go to IMF and the World Bank, because then we lose sovereignty. Maybe that's the best thing that could frankly happen, is you go and get some professional managers to come in and call the shots, because so far, I'm afraid, our politicians have done a terrible job of actually doing what the country needs.
Oh, there you go. That's for you, Val. Let's move on. University of Stellenbosch Business School. This is Daniel Malan. He says, thanks for a great webcast. I fully agree with Bruce's views on unfairness. One of the ways to deal with it is to accept that those who have benefited unfairly must make sacrifices. Is that compatible with being an opportunist?
Okay, let me try and say from Daniel Malan. That name has got historical connections in South Africa, of course, as well. I don't know if you're related. And I mean, we've seen many Malans and Verwoerds, and everybody start thinking very.
Oh, stop it, Bruce. Answer the question.
Okay, I'm thinking while I'm busy obfuscating. Geez, like, you know this game better than I do. So do we need to make sacrifices? I think we already do make sacrifices. I think top income earners in South Africa make some of the biggest sacrifices in the world in terms of their earnings. They make some very significant sacrifices. 120,000 people, according to the budget 2020, earn more than 1.5 million rand a year in South Africa. And everybody earns over 1.5 million rand a year. It gives 45% of that to governments to run the country. So I think already South Africa's wealthy do make significant sacrifices, and that's not going to be a popular view to have. I think we need rich people. I think we need to encourage people to be rich. I think we need to encourage people to be rich and registered as taxpayers and employ people and pay their taxes, because that ultimately is in the best interest of the country. So I think we should have more of those people doing more of the stuff they do and do well, and they must do it with a level of integrity that perhaps many people in South Africa don't do. So sacrifices, yes, we already do sacrifice an awful lot of what we earn, but yes, let's have more people sacrificing that amount, and then we get ourselves out of trouble. If you start disincentivizing wealth creation, then you create a whole new series of problems.
Stephen Dodge, he's an attorney at Different Thala Attorneys Incorporated. Now, he's got a bit of a long one, so we got to pay attention here. As a construction law attorney, I've seen an enormous decrease in large public and private sector construction projects, things like power stations, apart from Medupi and Kusile, roads and other infrastructure. It's clear that government isn't spending money that's affecting the private sector too. If government doesn't want to invest, the private sector won't want to either. How do we fix this? Is it as simple as government pouring money into new construction projects?
Nothing is simple, I'm afraid. And if we look at the South Africa's construction sector, did so well in the run-up to the World Cup 2010, built great infrastructure. What we then discovered was there was a whole bunch of underhanded activity, and people were collaborating in ways that they shouldn't, and upset the Competition Commission. And ever since then, I think the trust deficit has been absolutely enormous. South Africa's construction sector, once huge and proud, is a shadow of its former self. I'm not too sure that even the private sector construction industry has got what it takes to build the infrastructure that we require in order to provide the backbone for growth that we need into the future. At some point, I suspect we're going to have to go and get help from elsewhere, as we've seen many other African countries have to do, and get Chinese construction engineers involved, possibly workers involved as well. So yeah, I think we're in a really difficult space there. But yes, it is going to take government to step up to the pace. And unfortunately, we're already up to here in terms of public debt. We don't have too much room to move. But somehow we are going to have to find a new catalyst for the infrastructure we so desperately need, whether it be dams, whether it be power. And getting private sector involvement, of course, is absolutely pivotal. But private sector is not going to step up to the plate until there's certainty on the validity and the value of that investment. So it comes down again, it's the most boring statement, and I'm bored of saying it, but policy certain.
Indeed, indeed. John Sharp here touches on something you touched on a little bit earlier on around the media. He's from Barlow World, and he says, as human beings, we seem to be wired for sensationalism and negativity. All media is well aware of this, and they control the dominant narrative. Do you, Bruce, believe that the more important narratives become casualties of the most sensational or dominant narrative of the time? And following on from this negativity then leads most people with the inability to see opportunity and see hope.
That is the point of the book. I'll just say to you, please go and buy the book, please read the book, because I think we spend far too much of our waking lives worrying about the rascals, reprobates, and problem causes. We spend far too much of our time obsessing about that aspect of our life and not on the rebels, the renegades, and the problem solvers. And the book, hopefully, and Andile, you've read it, so hopefully you will back me up on this, is a view that we need to also, that more holistic view of the world. It's not all good, it's not all bad, it's somewhere in between, and it veers and it ebbs and it flows. But frankly, we need to be focusing a lot more energy on creating the businesses, supporting the people who are courageous enough to put their necks on the line, their own capital on the line, to create the future that we so desperately need in South Africa. The upside of down is precisely that. Yes. How chaos and uncertainty breeds the opportunity that opportunists like hopefully yourself can take advantage of in a society where people are scared to take risk. We need to liberate the risk takers.
Next question from a colleague of yours, in fact, Guguletu Mfupi from Kaya FM. She says, great work, Andile and Bruce. Corporate South Africa has often faced a lot of criticism for requiring regulation to drive inclusivity, sustainability, and social responsibility. In your years of experience, has this view changed? Are we seeing capital develop a consciousness, i.e. ESG?
You see, now I've suddenly buttoned up my jacket because it's Gugu, and she's very, very particular about her things. So I must answer her question very specifically. I think, again, when I say deregulate, I don't mean throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it's been necessary for South African corporates to be told what to do. They've been reluctant social citizens. We've seen such spectacular examples just in the last 18 months or so of disastrous corporate governance, for example, where companies have been pursuing growth at all costs, where companies have not been socially responsible, where companies have not been considering issues such as climate change, not been considering issues such as poverty alleviation. They took the Milton Friedman view of the business of businesses doing business and have been very, very much stuck to that. Now, many companies are better corporate citizens than others, but we've seen the disastrous collapses of the likes of Steinhoff and African Bank, and so many for different reasons. African Bank and Steinhoff, fundamentally different causes. Tongaat Hewlett, fundamentally different causes, where we've seen levels of deceit, where we've seen levels of outright fraud. So I don't think corporate South Africa has covered itself in glory. If you can be bothered to read the CSI reports of companies, they're long, they're turgid, they're boring, they're self-congratulatory. I don't think they go nearly far enough in terms of being good social citizens. And I think we need to expect more of our companies to do so. But because companies have been so on the back foot and have been so desperately just trying to survive, we've possibly cut them quite a lot of slack in terms of just wanting them to survive and thrive, to create jobs, to pay their taxes. And maybe the one thing we learn out of this health crisis is that the world is not allowed to go back to its bad habits of before, and we need to hold our companies to higher levels of account. And Google and myself and others in media need to be paying far more attention to the so-called soft issues, because those soft issues, as we're now learning to our cost, become hard issues blooming quickly, as we're experiencing with the lockdowns.
Ed Grondel, he's a retired ex-first-hand executive. He congratulates you on the book, and he says he can't wait for his personalized autographed copy. So there you go. You got to do that.
Ed, you buy a book, you bring it to me. I'll sign your face if you want.
He makes reference to something you touched on, in fact, in your book about initiatives that partner with the private sector to assist in education. He says here that he was privileged to be part of Partners for Possibility, an initiation by Louise van Rijn, where business leaders worked hands-on with headmasters of township schools. And he can confirm that the caliber of teaching staff is the fundamental problem in the education system. His question is, why don't we see government meeting with business leaders to address the education problem, which is key to our future? I guess
I take my hat off to Louise van Rijn. I mean, she is a remarkable individual, and I've seen her ebb and flow in her enthusiasm for this huge project, because she takes it deeply personally. And she has encouraged, I forget exactly how many, I think 1,400 executives over many years to go and partner with underprivileged schools. And the big lesson that emerges from this is not necessarily what the corporate sector gives to education. That, of course, is absolutely pivotal. But time and time again, and she's writing a book on this at the moment in terms of her experiences, is the huge lessons that corporates get out of going and facing the coalface, the reality that many township schools have to deal with. You can have some great head teachers who, with all the best will in the world, don't have the backing or the authority of government. They don't have the old school inspector system to back them up. They don't have the big stick approach. They've got very powerful trades unions. They've got teachers who don't pitch. They've got teachers who don't teach properly. They've got kids who are sometimes quite hard to discipline. And so Partners for Possibility is that sort of level of interaction, which is so absolutely pivotal. And I'm delighted that the Upside of Down draws attention to the huge opportunity that Louise van Rijn proffers to us and says, here is it doesn't fix the problem, but here is a way to address it, because we can't wave a magic wand. As much as we want to Harry Potter this thing and make it all go away and make it better, unfortunately, it takes a huge amount of really dedicated hard work in order to do so. So people like Ed, who were cornered by Louise and encouraged by Louise to have a huge impact, are absolutely pivotal in the rebuild story of South Africa.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have to stop it right there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. Let me also tell you that there's so many themes that are left that Bruce and I didn't discuss. He talks about the political economy. He talks about land. He's got a lot to say about the policies of the country and the choices we make. Very fascinating for me was also the interactions that you shared, Bruce, when you were speaking to business leaders, lessons from billionaires, talking to people like the founder of Nando's and some of the things that he shared in his journey. So there's a hell of a lot in the book for everybody to get through. So please do get the book. Before I wrap, Bruce, do you have anything else you'd like to say?
Just 2 more hours. All I need is 2 more. Okay, just buy the book and you can read the book. Can we all please toughen up a little bit and take the Bidvest approach? And I'll leave you with this last thought. If you go into any Bidvest facility anywhere in the country, you will be met with a sign that says Bidvest does not participate in the recession. Bidvest does not participate in the recession. You go, how can you not participate in the recession? If we're in a recession, you're in the recession. Don't bull dust yourself. But it is a mindset positioning. South Africa's economy is going to contract by between 2 and 4%, says the Reserve Bank. Some private sector economists say it'll be even more than that. If you go into this fearful and in a consolidation frame of mind without the view that we can grow out of this at some point in the future, you contribute to the problem. If you take the Bidvest perspective, which is not put blinkers on and ignore the environment, don't pretend the crisis doesn't exist. Engage with the crisis, understand the crisis, navigate the crisis better than your competitors. And that's, I think, what the Bidvest statement means. It just means you've got to emerge out of this crisis stronger than your biggest rivals, and then you're ahead out of this crisis, and you stand a chance of building further into the future. So if you treat it with the best perspective of not participating in your mind in the recession, but look at it from a growth perspective, from an opportunistic point of view, and don't be the optimist, don't be the pessimist, don't be the realist, be the opportunist in this environment. Find the opportunities and address those opportunities. And as one of the founders of Waze said to Mark Barnes, or at a gathering where Mark Barnes was, you make a lot more money out of addressing misery than you do out of creating comfort. And we have so much misery in our country, and that misery is going to worsen, but that provides a huge opportunity to help lift this country and this economy, because frankly, we have no choice.
The upside of down. He is right here, Bruce Whitfield. Thank you so much, my brother. I wish you all the best on the book.
Thank you.
For everyone else that is hooked on to the call, here's a few ways of you getting the book. So first up, let me thank our partners at Pan Macmillan. Those are the publishers of the book and exclusive books. You can go and become a Fanatics member. Just simply go to exclusivebooks.co.za/Fanatics. You join the club, and then you get a 10% discount on the paperback version. And if you cannot wait for lockdown to end for you to get the paperback version, as Bruce is giving you a lovely visual of the book, you can
there it is.
Amazon.com, Kobo.com. You can go and get your digital version, download it, and start reading over the weekend as well. Thanks to everybody at Ins Connect. Thanks to everyone at Corpcom for making this possible. And of course, any of our guests, if you're looking for any digital investor marketing and communication solutions, don't hesitate to contact us at ins.co.za. Bruce, my brother, thank you so much for writing this book.
Andile, thank you for allowing me to share it with everybody. To everybody who's logged in and watched us, thank you from all over the place. I know that many of you have taken valuable time out to do this. Get back to work. The economy needs you. Go. Shoot. Go.
Go.